My name is Evangeline, and I'm telling you this story 9 years later, sitting in my corner office overlooking downtown Seattle. But that cold February night when I was 16, I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a secret that would change everything. "Pack your stuff," my father Gerald barked from the kitchen doorway, his voice cutting through the house like broken glass. "You're nothing but a burden." If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I stood frozen in the hallway, my school backpack still slung over my shoulder, watching my adoptive mother Cordelia nod in agreement behind him. Her perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her coffee mug, like she was already planning what to do with my empty bedroom. My younger siblings, Thaddeus and Persephone, peered down from the staircase banister. Instead of shock or sadness, their faces wore twisted smiles. Thaddeus actually started clapping slowly, like this was some kind of performance. Finally, Persephone whispered loud enough for me to hear. "Now we don't have to pretend anymore." The words hit me like ice water, but I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't even argue. Instead, I did something that would haunt them for years to come. I smiled. Not a bitter smile or a broken one. A knowing smile. The kind that holds secrets too dangerous to speak out loud. "All right," I said quietly, walking past them toward the stairs. "I'll be gone in 20 minutes. Gerald's eyebrows furrowed. He expected tears, drama, maybe even violence. What he got was a calm 16-year-old girl who moved through their house like she owned it. Because in a way I did. As I packed my few belongings into a duffel bag, I could hear them whispering downstairs. Cordelia's nervous laugh. Gerald's confused muttering. They thought they were getting rid of their problem. They had no idea they were creating their biggest nightmare. 20 minutes later, I walked down those stairs for the last time. The family that raised me for 8 years stood clustered by the front door like a firing squad. "Don't come back," Gerald said, opening the door to the frigid night air. I shouldered my bag and looked each of them in the eye. "Don't worry. I won't need to." The door slammed behind me with such force that the decorative wreath fell to the porch floor. I could hear my siblings cheering inside, their voices muffled but unmistakably celebratory. I just kept walking down Maple Street, my breath forming small clouds in the winter air. Each step took me further from the only home I'd known since I was 8 years old. But here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't have possibly imagined in their wildest dreams. 3 days before they kicked me out, I had discovered something in Gerald's home office. Something that would make their comfortable suburban life come crashing down like a house of cards. And I was the only one who knew where all the bodies were buried. Let me take you back to where it all began. I was 8 years old, standing in the lobby of Sunshine Children's Home, clutching a raggedest stuffed elephant named Peanut. The social worker, Mrs. Holloway, had promised me a forever family. Gerald and Cordelia Ashworth walked in like they owned the world. He wore a navy suit that cost more than most people made in a month. She smelled like expensive vanilla and false promises, her blonde hair swept into a perfect chignon. "She's beautiful," Cordelia whispered, kneeling down to my level. Her smile was camera-ready, but her eyes were calculating, measuring me like a piece of furniture. Gerald's hand rested on my shoulder, heavy and warm. "Would you like to come home with us, Evangeline?" Home. The word tasted like honey on my tongue. I nodded so hard my pigtails bounced. What I didn't understand then was that I wasn't being adopted out of love. I was being collected. The Ashworth house sat on Willow Creek Lane like a magazine cover come to life. White columns, wraparound porch, rose bushes that bloomed in perfect rows. Inside, everything was beige and cream and untouchable. "This is your room," Cordelia said, opening a door to reveal walls painted soft lavender, a bed with more pillows than I'd ever seen, and toys arranged with military precision. But it was the family photos lining the hallway that told the real story. Gerald and Cordelia at charity galas, shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons at hospital wings. Always smiling, always performing. "The adoption agency loves families like us," Gerald explained over dinner that first night, cutting his steak into perfect squares. "It looks good for their statistics." I was their good deed. Their tax write-off wrapped in pigtails and hand-me-downs. For 3 blissful months, I believed I'd won the lottery. Cordelia bought me clothes that actually fit. Gerald helped with homework at the massive oak dining table. Thaddeus and Persephone, both younger than me, seemed excited to have a big sister. Then the novelty wore off. The camera smiles faded when the social workers stopped their monthly visits. The hugs became perfunctory. The bedtime stories disappeared altogether. By Christmas, I was eating dinner alone in the kitchen while they gathered around the dining room table like I was invisible. My presents were always practical, bought in bulk from discount stores, while Thaddeus and Persephone unwrapped gaming systems and designer clothes. But I adapted. Children do that, you know. We bend and twist and reshape ourselves to fit whatever space we're given, no matter how small or cold. I learned to be grateful for scraps. By the time I turned 12, I had become a ghost in my own home. I floated through rooms unnoticed, my footsteps absorbed by Persian rugs worth more than college tuition. The Ashworth house breathed wealth, but it exhaled indifference. Cordelia stopped pretending to care about my school grades. Gerald's business trips grew longer, his presence at home growing thinner like morning fog. When he was around, his eyes slid past me like I was wallpaper. Thaddeus and Persephone, now 10 and 8, had learned cruelty from masters. They would hide my homework, break my belongings, then watch with delighted eyes as I got blamed for being irresponsible. Evangeline lost her science project again. Persephone would announce at dinner, her voice dripping with fake concern. Perhaps she needs to learn organization skills, Gerald would reply, never looking up from his phone. But it was Cordelia's betrayal that cut deepest. The woman who once tucked me in at night now treated me like a stain on her perfect reputation. When her country club friends visited for tea, I was banished to my room like a shameful secret. We don't need to mention Evangeline. I once overheard her telling Mrs. Pemberton from the garden club. She's, well, you understand, not really family. The words carved themselves into my chest like a surgeon's knife, precise and devastating. I started spending more time in the local library, a limestone building that smelled like old books and possibility. Mrs. Chin, the librarian, was the first adult in years who looked at me like I mattered. "You're quite the reader," she said one autumn afternoon, checking out my stack of biography books. Leaders, innovators, survivors. Interesting choices for someone your age. I was learning that power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, patient, building strength in the shadows while others performed in the light. At home, I became invisible by choice rather than circumstance. I moved through their lives like smoke, observing everything, remembering everything. Gerald's late-night phone calls in his study. Cordelia's mysterious shopping trips that left her drained and secretive. The way they both grew tense whenever certain names were mentioned at dinner parties. I was 13 when I first understood that the Ashworth family fortune wasn't built on Gerald's architectural firm alone. There were other investments, other partnerships, other sources of income that required careful management and absolute discretion. And I was the only one paying attention. I discovered my power by accident on a rainy Thursday in October when I was 14. Gerald's study door, usually locked tighter than Fort Knox, sat slightly ajar. Inside, papers scattered across his mahogany desk like fallen leaves, and his computer hummed with unguarded secrets. Most teenagers would have grabbed candy from the kitchen or snooped through their parents' bedroom. But I had learned to hunt for bigger prey. The manila folders were labeled with names I recognized from dinner party conversations. Pemberton, Whitmore, Sterling. All pillars of our small Connecticut community, all smiling faces from charity galas and ribbon cuttings. But these documents told different stories. Bank statements showing money flowing through offshore accounts like underground rivers. Property deeds for land purchased under shell company names. Investment portfolios that shouldn't exist according to public tax records. Gerald wasn't just an architect. He was an orchestrator, moving money through a maze of legal gray areas and careful omissions. My hands trembled as I photographed page after page with my cheap cell phone. The flash seemed too bright, too obvious, but I couldn't stop. This was power in its purest form. Information that could unravel lives. The sound of Gerald's Mercedes pulling into the driveway sent me flying from the study, but not before I noticed one more thing. A locked filing cabinet labeled Serafina Holdings. Serafina. It meant burning one, angel of purification. How poetic for a company that laundered money. Over the following months, I became a detective in my own home. I memorized Gerald's schedule, learned when Cordelia took her long bubble baths, mapped out every moment when I could slip into that study undetected. What I discovered was breathtaking in its scope. Gerald had been skimming from charity funds, inflating construction costs on municipal projects, and partnering with developers who cut corners on safety regulations. He was a spider sitting in the center of a web that stretched across 3 states. But the most damning discovery came on a snow-covered February morning. Hidden behind architectural drawings was a ledger that made my blood freeze. Adoption placement fees. Thousands of dollars paid to speed up processes, bypass background checks, ensure certain families got priority placement. The Ashworth family hadn't just adopted me as a tax write-off. They had bought me. And I wasn't the first. The ledger showed payments dating back 15 years. Children placed in homes, then mysteriously returned to the system when the novelty wore off or the tax benefits expired. A revolving door of small lives treated like commodities. I sat in that leather chair, surrounded by evidence of systematic corruption, and felt something crystallize inside my chest. Not rage, though that burned there too. Something colder and more patient. Purpose. They had raised me to be grateful for scraps, but they had forgotten one crucial detail. They had also raised me to be smart. Smart enough to recognize opportunity when it knocked. And opportunity was about to kick down their door. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took 3 months of careful planning, of watching Gerald and Cordelia move through their days blissfully unaware that their adopted daughter had become their greatest threat. I started small. A misplaced invoice here, a conveniently timed phone call there. Nothing dramatic enough to raise suspicions, but enough to make Gerald's perfectly ordered world develop tiny cracks. The first real test came during one of their dinner parties. 20 guests scattered across the living room, champagne glasses catching candlelight like trapped stars. Gerald held court by the fireplace, regaling City Councilman Morrison with stories about his latest municipal project. "The community center will be my legacy," Gerald proclaimed, his voice carrying the weight of false modesty. "Quality construction, no corners cut, every dollar accounted for." I walked past him carrying a tray of canapés, invisible as always. But as I passed, I whispered just loud enough for Morrison to hear, especially the 30% markup on materials. Gerald's face went white as bone. Morrison's eyebrows knitted together in confusion. The conversation stumbled and died. "What did you say?" Gerald grabbed my arm as I headed back to the kitchen. I looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "I said the canapés are really good." Cordelia outdid herself. But he heard the lie. More importantly, he heard the warning. That night, I listened from the top of the stairs as Gerald tore through his study, checking locks, moving papers, changing passwords on his computer. The sound of a powerful man realizing he was vulnerable was sweeter than any lullaby. Over the next few weeks, I escalated my campaign. Anonymous tips to tax auditors that went nowhere because they lacked specific evidence. Questions posed to Cordelia's country club friends about charity fund allocation that made her squirm during bridge games. I was threading needles with surgical precision, applying pressure without breaking anything. Yet, the beauty of psychological warfare is that it works best on guilty consciences. Gerald and Cordelia knew they were criminals, which meant every shadow could hide an enemy, every phone call could be their downfall. I watched Gerald develop insomnia, saw Cordelia jump at unexpected sounds. They started arguing behind closed doors, their voices sharp with accusation and fear. "Someone knows," Cordelia hissed one night when they thought I was asleep. "Someone is watching us." "Don't be paranoid," Gerald replied, but his voice lacked conviction. They never suspected the quiet girl who served their dinner and cleared their plates. I was furniture to them, background noise in their important lives. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was underestimating how much a furniture piece could absorb, how much it could learn, how much it could plan. By the time winter arrived, I had everything I needed. Names, dates, bank account numbers, recorded conversations, photographic evidence. A complete blueprint of their corruption spanning 7 years. But I wanted more than just evidence. I wanted them to know what it felt like to be powerless, to have someone else control their fate. I wanted them to feel what they had made me feel for 8 long years. And I was about to get exactly that. Christmas morning arrived like a perfectly wrapped gift I had been preparing for months. Snow fell past the breakfast room windows while Gerald and Cordelia sat reading the newspaper, their coffee cooling in expensive china cups. Thaddeus and Persephone were upstairs, probably planning new ways to torment me. But their cruelty seemed small now, almost quaint compared to the storm I was about to unleash. I placed the manila envelope next to Gerald's coffee with the same care Cordelia arranged flowers. No dramatic flourish, no theatrical presentation. Just a simple brown envelope with no return address. "What's this?" Gerald asked, not really paying attention. "Came in yesterday's mail," I said quietly. "Addressed to you specifically." He opened it with the casual indifference of a man accustomed to receiving important documents. Then his face went from rose-colored contentment to ash-gray terror in the space of 3 heartbeats. The photographs were pristine. Bank statements showing the $20,000 skimmed from the Pemberton Children's Hospital Fund. Municipal contracts with inflated material costs highlighted in yellow marker. A screenshot of the Serafina Holdings account showing deposits that coincided perfectly with charity fundraising dates. But it was the handwritten note that made his hands shake. "I know what you did. I know where the money went. I know about the adoption payments. You have 48 hours to transfer $50,000 to the account listed below, or these documents go to the FBI, the IRS, and the Hartford Courant simultaneously. This is not a negotiation." Gerald's coffee cup shattered against the marble floor, dark liquid spreading like spilled blood. "What is it?" Cordelia rushed to his side, her silk robe flowing behind her like worried wings. He couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Just handed her the photographs and watched her face crumble as she realized their perfect life was built on quicksand. I continued clearing the breakfast dishes, moving around their panic with practiced invisibility. They never once looked at me. Even in their terror, I remained furniture. "Who could know this?" Cordelia whispered, her voice brittle as winter branches. "Could be anyone. A disgruntled employee, someone from the city planning office, maybe even one of our partners trying to squeeze us out." I almost smiled at that. They were searching for external enemies while the real threat hummed Christmas carols and loaded their dishwasher. The next 47 hours were exquisite. Gerald made frantic phone calls, trying to liquidate assets quickly enough to meet the deadline. Cordelia canceled lunch dates and bridge games, too consumed with crisis management to maintain social pretenses. They fought constantly. Hushed, vicious arguments that echoed through the house like gunshots. "This is your fault," Cordelia hissed. "Your greed, your shortcuts." "Our greed," Gerald snapped back. "You enjoyed every penny of those vacations to Monaco, every piece of jewelry bought with charity money." I watched them cannibalize each other with the detached interest of a scientist observing lab rats. 8 years of emotional neglect had taught me to find comfort in other people's discomfort. On the 48th hour, Gerald transferred the money. $50,000 moved from his personal account to a fund I had established for college scholarships for foster children. The irony was so perfect it made me dizzy. But this was just the opening move in a much longer game. That night, as Gerald and Cordelia slept fitfully in their master bedroom, I slipped into his study one last time. Not to steal more evidence, but to leave something behind. A single photograph tucked into his desk drawer. Me at age 8, standing in the Sunshine Children's home lobby, clutching my stuffed elephant and trusting that families were built on love. On the back, I had written, "You should have loved me." January brought the kind of cold that made bones ache and secrets harder to hide. Gerald moved through the house like a hunted animal, jumping at doorbell rings and unexpected phone calls. Cordelia developed a nervous habit of checking locks twice, then 3 times. But I was just getting started. The second envelope arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who refused to say who had hired him. This time, I made sure to be in the room when Gerald opened it. Inside were copies of emails between Gerald and the mayor discussing kickbacks on the new school construction project. $25,000 in exchange for ensuring Gerald's firm won the bid, despite submitting costs 15% higher than his competitors. The note was simpler this time, another $50,000 to the same account. You have 24 hours. Gerald's face went purple with rage. This is extortion. Yes, I said quietly from the corner where I was folding laundry. It is. They both turned to stare at me. For a moment, I thought they suspected. But then Cordelia shook her head. Evangeline's right. We need to call the police. And tell them what? Gerald snapped. That someone is blackmailing us with evidence of our crimes? They'll arrest us, not help us. I watched him pace the length of the living room like a caged leopard. Every step was a small victory, every curse word a testament to my growing power. But the real masterpiece came 3 days later. I had been documenting their crimes for months, but I had also been documenting something else. Their treatment of me. Their emotional abuse, their negligence, their complete failure as parents. Video recordings of family dinners where they ignored me completely. Audio files of conversations where they discussed returning me to the system like defective merchandise. Photographs of Christmas mornings where my gifts were clearly afterthoughts, while Thaddeus and Persephone's presents overflowed beneath the tree. I compiled it all into a presentation that would have made my media studies teacher weep with pride. Then I sent it to someone who could do something about it. Mrs. Holloway, my old social worker, still worked for the State Child Services Department. She also had connections with investigative journalists who specialized in adoption corruption. The email I sent was simple. I think you need to see this. There are more children involved than just me. Within a week, Gerald received a call from a Hartford Courant reporter asking about irregularities in adoption placement fees. The same day, Cordelia was approached at her yoga class by a woman from Child Protective Services asking about her experiences with the adoption process. The walls were closing in from every direction, but they still didn't suspect their quiet, invisible daughter. They were too busy destroying each other. This is all your fault, Cordelia screamed during one of their increasingly frequent fights. Your obsession with money, your corner-cutting, your need to be important. My fault. Gerald's voice echoed through the house. You were the one pushing for a bigger house, a better country club, private schools for your precious Thaddeus and Persephone. I listened from the top of the stairs, taking notes on their confessions. Even in their panic, they were providing me with ammunition. By the time February arrived, they had paid me a total of $150,000. Money that now funded scholarships for foster children across Connecticut. Every dollar they had stolen from charity was being returned to charity, with interest. But money was never really the point. The point was watching them realize that actions have consequences. That small, powerless people could become dangerous when pushed too far. That love, real love, was the only thing that could have saved them from this fate. And they had never even tried to love me. The final piece of my puzzle came together on February 14th. Valentine's Day seemed appropriate for what I was planning, a twisted love letter to the family that had taught me the difference between charity and affection. Gerald sat in his study that morning, frantically calling lawyers and accountants, trying to find legal ways to protect assets that were about to be frozen. Cordelia paced the living room, her perfect manicure chewed down to ragged stumps. Thaddeus and Persephone had finally noticed the tension. They whispered in corners, their casual cruelty replaced by genuine fear. For the first time in years, they looked at me with something approaching respect. They sensed a predator in their midst, even if they couldn't identify it. I chose lunchtime for my revelation. The four of them sat around the dining room table, picking at sandwiches and avoiding eye contact. The silence was thick as honey, sweet with unspoken terror. I've been thinking, I said, setting down my glass of milk with deliberate precision. About family. Gerald's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Cordelia's breathing became shallow and quick. About how families are supposed to protect each other, love each other unconditionally. About how parents are supposed to sacrifice for their children, not the other way around. Evangeline, Cordelia's voice was barely above a whisper. What are you talking about? I reached into my backpack and pulled out a manila folder, placing it in the center of the table like a centerpiece. I'm talking about the fact that you never loved me. Any of you. The folder contained photocopies of everything. Bank statements, email exchanges, recorded conversations, photographs of documents that proved 8 years of systematic corruption. But most importantly, it contained proof that they had been selling children. I know about the adoption fees, I continued, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. I know you've been getting kickbacks for placing kids in specific homes, then helping those families return them when the novelty wore off. I know about the network of families who treat children like rental cars. Gerald's face had gone completely white. Evangeline, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table like tarot cards predicting their doom. I understand that I was merchandise to you. A tax write-off with pigtails. A photo opportunity for your charity galas. Thaddeus and Persephone stared at the papers with growing comprehension. Even they, young and self-centered as they were, could recognize the magnitude of what their parents had done. But here's what you don't understand, I continued, standing up to look down at them like the judge at their final sentencing. I've been documenting everything for 2 years. Every crime, every scheme, every child you helped exploit. Cordelia's hand flew to her throat. It was you. The blackmail, the threats. Was justice, I finished. $150,000 that you paid to scholarship funds for foster children. Your stolen money, returned to its rightful purpose. Gerald lunged across the table, reaching for the papers, but I was already moving. 8 years of being invisible had taught me to be quick, to anticipate, to always have an escape route. Copies, I said simply. Hidden in 12 different locations. Including the safety deposit box I opened with my babysitting money and the fake ID I bought from Jimmy Martinez in my chemistry class. The room went dead silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, counting down the seconds until their old life ended forever. Tomorrow morning, I said, shouldering my backpack, every newspaper in the state gets copies. The FBI gets copies. The adoption agency gets copies. Your country club friends get copies. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the family that had raised me to be invisible. Unless, of course, you'd like to save yourselves the embarrassment and turn yourselves in tonight. They kicked me out 3 days later, just as I knew they would. Cornered animals always lash out at the nearest target, and I had made myself the perfect scapegoat for their crimes. Pack your stuff, Gerald snarled, his words cutting through the house like shattered glass. You're nothing but a burden. But I had already packed. Had been ready for this moment since I first discovered their secrets 2 years ago. Every piece of evidence was safely stored elsewhere, every contingency planned down to the last detail. As I walked down Maple Street that frigid February night, my phone buzzed with the first news alert. Prominent architect under federal investigation for adoption fraud. The dominoes were falling exactly as I had designed them to. I spent that first night in the public library, curled up in the reading section until the security guard found me at dawn. Mrs. Chin, the librarian who had been my sanctuary for years, made a few phone calls. By afternoon, I was staying with her cousin Maria, a foster parent who specialized in emergency placements for older teenagers. Maria's house was small, warm, and smelled like cinnamon and honest affection. She asked no questions about my past, just handed me clean towels and showed me how the shower worked. You're safe now, she said simply, and for the first time in 8 years, I believed it. Over the next few weeks, I watched my former family's empire crumble from the comfort of Maria's kitchen table. Gerald was arrested on federal racketeering charges. Cordelia faced state charges for child endangerment and fraud. Their assets were frozen pending investigation. Thaddeus and Persephone were placed with Gerald's elderly parents in Vermont, far from the wreckage of their parents' choices. Part of me felt sorry for them. They had been raised by wolves and taught to bite anything weaker than themselves. But mostly, I felt free. The Hartford Courant ran a front-page series called The Adoption Pipeline, detailing how wealthy families had been essentially purchasing children through corrupted placement agencies. My story became the centerpiece, though they protected my identity as a minor. 23 other children came forward with similar experiences. Kids who had been placed, returned, placed again, treated like commodities instead of human beings. The investigation expanded to include 3 states and dozens of families. Gerald and Cordelia both pleaded guilty to avoid federal prosecution. He received 12 years in prison, she got 8. Their house on Willow Creek Lane was sold to pay restitution to the charities they had robbed. I testified at their sentencing hearing via video conference, my face hidden, but my voice clear and strong. They taught me that love was conditional, I told the judge. That I had to earn my place at their table, in their family, in their world. But they also taught me something else, probably without meaning to. They taught me that power isn't about money or status. It's about truth. And truth, once released, can't be contained. Gerald looked directly into the camera when I finished speaking. For a moment, I saw something that might have been remorse in his eyes. But it was far too late for apologies. 9 years later, I sit in my corner office overlooking downtown Seattle, watching rain streak the windows like tears of gratitude. The bronze nameplate on my desk reads Evangeline Martinez Chin, honoring both Maria, who gave me a home, and Mrs. Chin, who gave me sanctuary. The Serafina Foundation, my nonprofit organization, has placed over 200 children in carefully vetted, loving homes. Every family undergoes extensive background checks, psychological evaluations, and a full year of monitoring. We don't just place children. We ensure they're cherished. The irony isn't lost on me that I named my foundation after Gerald's money laundering operation. Serafina, the burning angel, the purifier. But now she purifies the adoption system instead of corrupting it. Last month, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. Gerald, writing from federal prison, asking for forgiveness. His handwriting was shaky, aged by guilt and institutional food. He claimed to have found God, to understand the magnitude of his crimes against me and the other children. I read it once, then fed it to my office shredder. Forgiveness is a luxury I choose not to afford him. But the real surprise came yesterday. A knock on my apartment door revealed Persephone, now 23 and working as a social worker in Boston. She looked nothing like the cruel little girl who had cheered my banishment. Life had carved kindness into her features. I came to apologize, she said simply. And to thank you. We sat in my living room, drinking tea and talking about the family we used to be. She told me about therapy, about learning to recognize the emotional abuse we had all endured, about how my courage to expose the truth had ultimately saved her from becoming like our adoptive parents. They taught us that love was scarce, she said, tears flowing freely. That we had to compete for scraps of affection, that hurting others made us safer. I spent years unlearning those lessons. I looked at this young woman who had once delighted in my suffering and saw something I never expected to find. A sister. Not by blood or law, but by shared survival. I started a scholarship program at my university, she continued, for foster kids aging out of the system. I called it the Evangeline Fund. The words hit me like sunlight after a long winter. Not because she named it after me, but because she understood the true meaning of family. Family isn't about sharing DNA or legal documents. It's about choosing to protect and nurture each other. We hugged goodbye at my door, 2 survivors who had found different paths to healing. Today, I have a new family. Maria, who adopted me legally when I turned 17. Mrs. Chin, who became my honorary grandmother. The dozens of children who call me when they need advice, support, or just someone to remember their birthday. And tomorrow, I'm flying to Connecticut to speak at the Sunshine Children's Home anniversary celebration. Not as the broken 8-year-old who left with a suitcase and dreams of forever families, but as the woman who learned that sometimes you have to build your own family from scratch. The little girl with the stuffed elephant taught me that love isn't something you earn through perfection or performance. It's something you choose to give and receive, freely and without condition. Gerald and Cordelia gave me many things, though none of them were gifts. They gave me resilience, strategic thinking, and an unshakable understanding of justice. Most importantly, they gave me the knowledge that some families are born, some are chosen, and the chosen ones often love you better. I am no longer invisible. I am incandescent with purpose, blazing with the kind of love that transforms broken children into fierce protectors of other broken children. And that, more than any revenge, is the most beautiful ending I could have written.